Welcome to Project Arkangelos, Episode 7. So, when did I start contemplating the nature of God? What events caused me to contemplate God's existence? Well, basically, it was after the death of my mother. That was the cause. Once my mother passed away 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago now, naturally you start contemplating the afterlife. And especially because unless someone else has had that experience of losing a parent, you kind of can't really connect with people on that level. And you feel a bit trapped and isolated because you're having these superficial conversations with people, stressing about trivialities, and you kind of just want to scream at them like, watch out. You know, like Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, and she's like screaming at the fence like, she has no voice. And then World War III happens and the nukes drop. That's how it feels when you lose a parent. You just want to scream like, this shit doesn't matter. Everyone you know and love's gonna die. Fuck. Oh, fuck, do you see this predicament we're all in? That's how it feels. And you can only really connect with people who have also lost a parent. And you can have a really deep connection with people like that. And that's what caused me to start thinking about the nature of God. I never really thought about it until after that event. And now I think about it deeply, and I now have a lot of faith. Sorry, atheists. I have a lot of faith. And I feel like this world could use a lot more faith too. We've done enough with the rationality. We've been science to the nth fucking degree. Let's bring back faith, okay? Let's bring back a little bit of faith. A little bit of grace. Let's bring back a little bit of grace, a little bit of faith. So, and it's interesting because I was there in the hospital room with my family for my mother's last breath. And I'll tell you what, it is one final exhale. So it's when you stop breathing, that's the end. So the breath is really powerful. You know, with meditation and breath work, focusing on the breath, there's a bit more to it than you think. It's actually a lot more deeper. Yes, you start by focusing on the breath, but then gradually you realize the breath is everything. The breath is everything. Because your final moment, like you have a final breath, there's that expression, until my final breath, whatever it is. You do one last exhale and you don't breathe back in. That's what death is to me. But what's interesting is it's not like this moment where you see their spirit emerge and it's like death and like fireworks go off. It just kind of happens. And then it's another moment. And it's kind of like an anticlimax. It almost doesn't feel real. I think that's a huge part. You know, they call it the stages of grief. Grief? The stages of grief. And there's like denial, there's bargaining. But yeah, there's a huge coming to terms with the reality. I remember for days feeling like my mom was going to come out of the cupboard like, this was all a prank. You're on Punked, that TV show where we do a huge prank. We just wanted to trick you so you appreciate the people in your life more. I just thought, surely that's going to happen. This can't be real. This can't actually be real. So that was interesting. But what really got me was the day that my mother passed away. So she was in hospital for like a week or two. But the day that she passed away, I could just tell that this was it. And it was just the way the sun was shining. It was the way the sun was shining in the room, and not just the room, but like on the way to the hospital. The way that the sun was shining through the glass, it's like I already knew. It's almost like she'd already departed. And she was somewhere else, and she was sending a message through the sun. Because I just knew, some deep part of my soul knew that this was the final day before we were even told the news. Just by the way the sunlight was hitting the room, the way the sunlight was coming in, I could just tell. So that's interesting. That's pretty interesting. You got to admit that's interesting. So I spoke about the existence of God yesterday, and I wanted to discuss that more because I feel like it's not covered very much in a philosophical sense. I feel like it's just seen as like, oh, we already dismissed that. Richard Dawkins, la la la, we already dismissed that. But I feel like there's actually a lot of convincing arguments to make, even just on a philosophical level and logical level, for the existence of God, and a mathematical level, in fact. And I'm studying a degree that is heavily based in mathematics, okay? So you could call me crazy, you can call me stupid, but I'm studying something that is very highly logical, and I have arrived at these conclusions. So that's for you to deal with. Just because Richard Dawkins thinks for you, it doesn't mean you've necessarily thought this through. Have a conversation with me because I'll probably change your mind about a lot of shit. So, I had to write notes so I don't go off track. But it's okay if I go off track too. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes I just go into blank, dead air. However, that's how I arrived at contemplating deeply the nature of God. And also through studying philosophy. And I've taken philosophy classes. I actually have a minor in philosophy from my Bachelor of Music. I have a minor in philosophy, which doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean shit because, well, it means something, but it also doesn't mean shit. But it does mean something. But basically, when you study philosophy at a university, you're basically studying philosophy, but you're not necessarily philosophizing. You're just learning about philosophy. Basically, people who have thought before and written down their thought systems, you're studying them, you're studying the historical trends of philosophy. But no one really wants to hear your philosophy. It's not about your philosophy, it's about someone else's philosophy, and you're studying philosophy. So it's kind of bullshit. But it's also good to do, even just on a confidence level, just to say, I have a minor in philosophy, so I've taken it seriously. I've actually studied that. I've taken classes at an academic level. And through all my studies of philosophy, it led me to Plato. And Plato, he's like the OG philosopher. Now, there were pre-Socratic philosophers. There are philosophers before Socrates. Thales, for example, Heraclitus, for example. However, I feel like Plato was the big turning point. Plato talks a lot about Socrates. Of course, Socrates never wrote anything down. So there's that whole question of like, did Socrates exist? Which I think he did, but like how much of Socrates was Socrates and how much of Socrates was through the filter of Plato? And Plato basically uses Socrates as the main character in his dialogues. That's what's interesting about Plato's philosophy, is that it's all told through dialogues. And the dialogues are pretty funny because it's just everybody agreeing with Socrates. Socrates saying, but if you admit this, then wouldn't you say that this would be the case? And then the other person goes, well, of course. But naturally, yes, Socrates. But it's still an interesting form of philosophical discussion. Philosophical unveiling is through dialogue. Very interesting choice. And I believe Plato was actually a playwright, and he failed in that. So I think that's why he chose to do his philosophy in a dialogue format. He was also a wrestler. I think just being an ancient Greek, you were just made to be a wrestler. Kind of like an all-rounded intellectual. You were physically strong and you were wise. Which ties in with Plato's Republic, his idea of the ideal society, where you don't want to be too much of a warrior because then you're like a meathead, but you don't want to be too wise because then you're weak, you're a coward. You want to have this kind of balance. Obviously, there's more to the Republic, but just on that topic, just on that theme. So, studying Plato, highly recommend, by the way, highly recommend. Because there's that famous saying, all of philosophy is just footnotes to Plato. And it's true. because there's either people that agreed with Plato or there's people that disagreed with Plato. Like Nietzsche, for example, he was a huge critic of Socrates. He thought he was too democratic. He thought Socrates was too democratic. But what I'm interested in are the Neoplatonic philosophers. So the philosophy that came after Plato and the people who really tried to apply Plato's philosophy, particularly his idea of the forms. And I should point out Aristotle was one of Plato's students who also taught Alexander the Great. That's Aristotle. But over time, Aristotle distanced himself from the idea of the forms. So he disagreed with this idea of the forms. I guess he basically thought it was not provable. And if there is a form of a man, it's called his third man argument. You can look it up. I'm going to butcher it, so you can look it up. He calls it the third man argument, Aristotle's third man argument. And Aristotle, he's known for the amount of intellectual disciplines that are owed to Aristotle, like basically the basis of science, poetry, the poetics, the legal system. Like just those three things in themselves, pretty major. Even if you disagree with him now or he's been debunked now, you have to give him credit for his breadth of intellect. Like he basically laid the foundations of everything with his rationality, okay? So check out Aristotle, but particularly talking about Plato and the Neoplatonists, highly recommend. And the reason I'm talking about this is because it was through the Neoplatonists that I really started contemplating the nature of being and the nature of God and God's existence. So the Neoplatonists, they really applied Plato's philosophy, as I mentioned, the forms being this eternal realm where there is, for example, the form of a tree. That's the cliche example that's given, or the form of a potato. The idea being that there is like a perfect realm of forms where there is like the perfect form of, let's say, a circle. You know, the band A Perfect Circle. So there is the form of a circle, there is a form of a potato, there is a form of a man. But the world itself, the world of flesh, the physical world that we inhabit, is an imperfect copy of the realm of forms. We are like instantiations of perfect forms. So the eternal realm of forms are the perfect models or blueprints for reality, but reality itself is an imperfect copy of the realm of forms. But what's interesting is the forms aren't just physical manifestations. They're not just blueprints for physical objects in the world. The forms, for example, can also be intangible aspects. So you can have the form of justice. Very interesting. The form of the good with a capital G, the form of beauty. So the forms also encapsulate the intangible qualities of life, morality, not just physical objects. That's where it gets really fascinating. What I also love about Plato, just as a side note, I love Plato's idea of education. Really radical approach to education, and I'm a tutor, so that really applies to me because I love learning, and I don't really jive with our modern education system at all. At all. I learn way better by myself, with myself, and that's it. Having discussions, I learn better that way. I really don't like our education system. However, what I do like is Plato's ideas regarding education. And his ideas basically state that rather than thinking of education like filling a student up with knowledge, kind of like that Zen koan, that Zen saying about filling up a cup and you have to empty the cup first. Your cup is too full, so how can I teach you if your cup is too full? First you have to empty the cup. Similar to that, not the exact same, but similar. Plato is saying education isn't a process of filling a student up with knowledge. Education is more like redirecting a student's gaze, kind of like straightening their perception, straightening their view to view the forms or to view reality, kind of like redirecting their gaze towards truth, towards the forms, rather than telling them this is what's up, this is reality. You're kind of just assisting them and just kind of redirecting them like a telescope. You just kind of, over there, that's where it is. Instead of this education system of like, blah, 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 blah. Here is the knowledge and this is how it goes. So I thought that's a really radical, revolutionary approach to education, but I digress. So the Neoplatonists, okay, they took Plato's philosophy and they developed it further, particularly in regards to the forms. In particular, and highly recommend just looking it up. First of all, look it up because there's people that can describe it better, and you can look up Google Images, Neoplatonism, because you'll see a diagram of what I'm about to attempt to explain. But basically, the notion of God, it's kind of like the one. So in Neoplatonic philosophy, they call it the one with a capital O, kind of like Neo from the Matrix. And if you remember, Neo is an anagram of one. Neo was the one. Neo, one. So there is the one. And the one is almost has no essence. What I mean by that is the one is the originator. Basically, everything in reality emanates from the one, but the one cannot be known. It's kind of like, what is it, Taoism? The way that can be named is not the eternal way. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. It's kind of like that. Now, you can look further into it and confirm it for yourself, but the one is unknowable, basically, how I understand it, but everything emanates from the one. There's more to it than that. There's also the idea of the world soul. So it's not just like everything emanating from the one, there's levels to it. So from the one emanates the world soul, and then from the world soul emanates the world. So there's different layers to it. Again, you can look into it. There's all Plotinus, he's like the famous example of Neoplatonism. I highly recommend looking into it for yourself. You can look up videos that understand it way better than me. But that philosophy made a lot of sense to me, and it really got me contemplating the nature of God, the nature of being, the nature of what is at the apex of reality. And you don't even have to think of it like a hierarchy, but just like, where does everything come from? It's just a really simple question. Where does everything come from? And they had an answer for it. They had an idea, and they said the one. And I thought that was profound, even just to contemplate. And what's interesting is after the Neoplatonists, maybe a few hundred years, you get this figure that comes along, St. Augustine. Now, please word me up if there's more in between that. There's also links between Neoplatonist philosophers and someone called like Sakyamuni, who's related to like the Buddha, Sakyamuni Buddha. So people make these connections that maybe the Buddha, like the Buddha himself, crossed paths with the Neoplatonists. There's a lot of speculation historically about what was going on in India with the Buddha and what was going on in ancient Greece. What was going on with that time period? Was there intermingling of ideas there? Because there's very similar ideas going on. Would be interesting to know. Be interesting to go in a time machine and just see what was going on in the world at that time. Was there some kind of alignment of the planets? A lot of wisdom going on in the 300 BC period, whatever it was. A lot of wisdom going on. So, but along comes St. Augustine, I think like 300 AD, 400 AD, basically around the collapse of Rome, maybe after the collapse of Rome. And he read the ideas of the Neoplatonists. And long story short, I believe, in a really simplified sense, that he was really captivated by the Neoplatonists. So St. Augustine, he's really referenced in Christian philosophy. And he wrote, I think it was The City of God. He definitely wrote The City of God. And I believe that was they call them like the apologists, Christian apologists, because a lot of people at the collapse of Rome, at the fall of Rome, they blamed Christianity for the fall of Rome. But St. Augustine made this argument that actually it was Christianity that helped Rome not fall sooner. So he makes an argument that defends Christianity. So from there, so you have this philosopher who's taken Neoplatonic ideas, he's brought them to Christianity, he's fused them with Christianity. So can you see that connection I'm making here? I actually came towards considering the existence of God through philosophy, through logic, through mathematics. Another interesting cat to check out is Pythagoras. He thought everything was based in number. He thought everything was numbers. Now, it's hard to know his complete ideas because he didn't write anything down. But apparently he had a whole cult of people worshipping him like a god. But I think what we do know is that he believed numbers were at the base of reality. There's also stories of him being obsessed with the octave in music, the fact that you could get a string and then you completely halve it and it's the same note, but an octave higher or an octave lower. He was perplexed and obsessed with this mathematical proportion. So I've read, who knows? I mean, was someone there to write that down? I don't know. But I can imagine a dude who was obsessed with numbers, and apparently he didn't even create the Pythagorean theorem, but that's what we're taught in high school. So we may not even be taught the truth. Like, we get taught one little aspect of Greek philosophy in the form of Pythagorean theorem, and it may not have even been attributed to Pythagoras. I feel like I would have learned so much more if we talked about reality being numbers at the basis. I feel like that would have sparked my imagination way more than being tested on the Pythagorean theorem and no one explaining who Pythagoras was. I feel like that's really shallow, surface level education, but I digress. So, yeah, basically I have a lot of faith. And I have to like flesh it out over lots of episodes, and I have to deepen my own understanding as well. Hang on, someone's calling me. I just want to end that. I hope that didn't disturb the the video. But I deliberately put this on do not disturb mode, so hopefully it didn't. Stop calling me, people. So I also want to point out, and I think Augustine, they're calling again. I'm going to call you back. Just wait. So St. Augustine points out, and I'm going to wrap it up as well. What if it's an emergency? But it never really is. However, God being outside of space and time. So, scientists make the argument, oh, well, if God exists, then like we would have found him by now with our telescopes, with our James Webb telescope. We've looked out into the universe, no God there. And it's like, yeah, okay, but St. Augustine in like 400 AD, like 2,000 years ago, basically debunked that idea because he said maybe God is outside of space, maybe God is outside of time. Oh, we're going to find God, and we've gone into space, we haven't found God. It's just like, come on, man. Like, at least give it a steel man. They call it a straw man when you show like an argument in its weakest form. At least give it the steel man benefit of the doubt. Like, at least show it in its strongest light. Give it some credit. So I just find that idea really fascinating of God being eternal. I find the idea of eternity really fascinating. Beyond space, beyond time, timeless. Timelessness really fascinates me. So I also think that until you contemplate God, I don't know if you can have original thoughts. I do feel that God is like the basis for thinking. Because until you contemplate the originator of the universe, whether you believe in it or not, I don't see how you can have an original thought, because it's like you've got to start at step 1 or step 0 before you can step beyond that and start talking about the things in the world, like the things that the world is made up of. First, you have to discuss where the world came from, in my opinion. So I don't even see how you can have an original thought until you've contemplated the existence of God, which makes it very convenient that we live in such an atheistic world where it's like, there is no God. Ha 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 ha, we're so smart. It's very convenient because you're actually, I believe, eroding people's ability to think for themselves. Even though scientists act like, I'm so smart and I think for myself, I actually think you're diminishing people's ability to think themselves, to think for themselves, because you're just thinking for them. And then everyone goes, oh, Richard Dawkins debunked that. But it's like, yeah, but did you debunk it? You've got to think it through for yourself. Otherwise, you're Dawkins' little bitch. The bitch delusion, not the God delusion. The bitch delusion is what you have. So that's just what I think. You need to contemplate God in order to have an original thought. And I mean, I'll save this for another episode. This isn't really related to anything I've been talking about, but next episode, I want to talk about actions. Because I've noticed in my life that no matter how much visualization I do, nothing really happens in my life until I sit down, I make a plan, and then I take steps towards actualizing that plan. You can visualize for the rest of your life, but you're just going to be disillusioned when nothing fucking changes until you start taking action. Nothing in my life happens until I take action. There's no luck involved. You know, we look over at each other's lives. Oh, you're so lucky. Like, you just have to play the cards you're dealt. Everybody can get lazy. Like, if you're blessed with abundance, you can easily lose it all. It's just not how life works. That's why I see jealousy as pointless. That's why I see envy as pointless. Because you don't know what someone's been through, and you don't know what actions they are taking. That person can lose it all. You could lose it all. So just have a little gratitude for what you've got. And I'm just telling you, nothing ever happens until you take action. Again, you can visualize, you can pray all you want, but until you take action, nothing changes. That's my experience in life. Everything that's happened for me in my life, I've had to take action. Visualize all you want, manifest all you want. I guarantee nothing will happen until you take action. But I want to talk about that more in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed that discussion about the existence of God and how I arrived at such a conclusion. Please let me know your feedback. Remember to like, subscribe, follow, share this video, tell people about this podcast. Give me your feedback, send me a message, tell me where you agree, where you disagree, what you'd like to hear more of, what you'd like to hear less of. I love all the feedback because it helps me make this better for you, so I can start talking about the things that are actually relevant for you and less of me waffling on. But of course, I will always discuss what I find interesting, otherwise I can't really have enthusiasm towards doing this. So let's meet halfway, but it starts with you letting me know. Please like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, and I hope you're getting through this thing that we call life. I wish you a beautiful day, beautiful evening, beautiful week, beautiful month, beautiful year. A Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, Happy 2025. I send you peace and love.